Hi, Vanessa here and welcome back to my channel. Today we are discussing my September book wrap-up. September was an amazing reading month. I read 18 books and that was largely due to the fact that I participated in my first readathon, the Scooby-Doo-a-thon, which was 7 books in 14 days. I wanted to share some of the titles that I read to inspire you to add it to your reading list. I read 1 to 2 books a week and I chat about book reviews and book recommendations. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, please subscribe to my channel. Now, I'm not saying that you have to read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, but I'm pretty much saying that yes, you have to read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. It was by far my most favorite read of September. I haven't read such an adorable contemporary romance since The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hong. Do you know when you meet a stranger and you instantly click? That is how I felt the first few pages into The Hating Game. And The Hating Game was actually published in 2016, so I'm a little bit late to the game, but I'm just so glad that I found it. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, I would recommend it to you if you're a big romance fan as well. Now, Sally Thorne, she introduces us to Josh and Lucy, who are executive assistants to their respective CEOs, and they work side by side 40 hours plus a week. And that would totally be okay if they didn't completely hate each other. And their hate for each other is so legendary that the whole office knows about it, even HR knows about it. And they play these like fun games or pranks on each other daily just to kind of rile each other up. And I thought that was a really unique take on office romance. And so Josh is very corporate-y. When their two businesses had merged, their publishing house, Josh came from a corporate stuffy company and Lucy came from more laid back, open, warm. So even at the get-go, you know, their companies didn't really see eye to eye. And now there's a promotion up for grabs and only one position. So now it's Lucy versus Josh and they're really pitting against each other. But you know how sometimes hate brings on the same feelings as love? Like we get really like riled up and we think of the other person or we think about them and they're constantly on our mind. And so there's a fine line between hate and love. And Sally Thorne really explores that with Josh and Lucy. I really appreciated this book because even though it is a romance and romances are known for their like super steamy love scenes, I really appreciated the build up to the steamy romance scenes because I felt like that's where the magic had laid and why it's so unique to other romance books that I have read. I thought that the pace of this book was really well done. The flirtatious elements were very delicious. The only thing I will say that I wasn't over like the moon about this book is that Lucy had a lot of deprecation, I want to say, and not just like a little. I found it to be like often enough that I had noticed it. So look out for that. But other than that, The Hating Game gets like a 4.5 out of 5 stars to me. I definitely recommend that you read it. The second book I read, and I must be on a contemporary romance binge because I read The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. And Christina Lauren is actually a new author find for me. And I saw this book floating around Bookstagram and I finally got a copy of it. So I liked this book more than I thought I would. It is so funny. So whereas I thought The Hating Game was really adorable, I thought The Unhoneymooners were just like over the top funny. Like even the first scene, and I don't want to spoil it for you because it's just so ridiculous what happens that you can't imagine it happening in real life, but it totally works in the story. So we meet Olive and Ethan, and Olive's sister is getting married and to Ethan's brother. And something happens at the wedding the thing that you really have to read. I don't want to spoil for you, so good. And she can't go on her honeymoon, but it's like a non-refundable trip. And because Olive and her sister are twins, they devise a plan where it's like, okay, can you guys go on our honeymoon for us? And again, that would be okay if they like weren't arch enemies. So it seems like that's a common theme, arch enemies being forced to go on an all-inclusive romantic honeymoon in Hawaii. What can go wrong, right? And that is where the more ridiculousness comes in. A lot of things happen. I felt like I was watching one of those rom-coms, like, oh my goodness, what else will this couple have to deal with? And along the honeymoon, things start to shift. And we see Olive and Ethan enter a different type of space. So for my first Christina Lauren read, I thought it was fun. I thought the characters were enjoyable. It's definitely a light, fast read if you're looking for a romance, something that is a little bit different but also staying safe in the romance genre. I would rate this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. And the third book I read, I'm going to be really biased about it because it is written by J.D. Robb, who is my favorite author. And if you didn't know, J.D. Robb is actually the pen name for Nora Roberts. And Nora Roberts is huge. I think I read a statistic that said that every 27 seconds a Nora Roberts book is sold. So by the time this video is finished, probably like 20 of her books have sold. And if you think you know Nora Roberts, you definitely don't know J.D. Robb. J.D. Robb writes like witty, badass, homicidal. It's so good. It's just so different from her usual writing. And she has this series called the In Death series. And this is book number 49 called Vendetta in Death. And what makes this series so special is that it's written in the future. So between 2050 to 2060, and it centers around Lieutenant Eve Dallas and her police squad, and they do really solid police work trying to solve these murder mysteries. And if you like police procedural work, then you're definitely going to love the In Death series. But what adds another layer of element is that they use technologies that is available in the future. But it's not so far-fetched that your mind is like, okay, that's completely unrealistic. It's still really grounded, but it adds that unique element to it, which makes it so special to read. And then on top of that, I just really love hearing about the reoccurring characters. I think that's what makes a great series. And she is so fantastic about bringing back characters and catching us up on their lives. So Vendetta in Death features Lady Justice, who is a murderer that only targets men who have cheated, who have beaten, and who are just like scummy in life to women. So she castrates them and she leaves them on the street with like a poetic few words about why she had to do it. She thinks that she is, ridding the world, but because it's still homicide, it's still murder, Eve Dallas and her team have to figure out who this woman is, and by doing that, they have to go through the police procedure. As always, her books are 5 out of 5 for me. If you haven't picked up an in-depth book yet, I highly recommend that you do. The next book is Someone We Know by Sherry LaPena. And Sherry LaPena has been on my watch list because so many of her books have been really consistently good for me. 3.5, 4, 4.5. And the last one I read, if you caught my August wrap up, it was more like a classic whodunit. So I wanted to see where she was going this time around with Someone We Know. And it's a little bit different. It features like a small community of people where they all harbor secrets. And one teenager has this habit of breaking into people's houses and into their computers and discovering some of these secrets. And so on top of that, there is a murder that occurs on the block, and then all of a sudden, all their lives are intertwined. And so who murdered the woman? What kind of secrets did the teenager uncover? And how are they all linked up together. I thought this book was good. It was a little bit slow paced for me. I did not know who the murderer was. They did do a good job of just playing around with different characters' motives, but it wasn't enthralling. So at the end, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I still think Shari LaPena is an excellent writer. She still creates a great story for me, so I will be looking out for her next book. The next 2 books are by authors I always enjoy, Karin Slaughter and Lisa Gardner. I read Lisa Gardner's Never Tell and Karin Slaughter's The Last Widow. The Last Widow is centered around William Trent, so it is a series. So I think this is number 9, but it's okay if you read it as a standalone as well. It is a very police procedural work, but also tied in is aspects of cult life, which I found really interesting and disturbing as well. So I thought she brought a new layer to police procedure work, and I thought that was interesting. At times, I thought the book was a little bit too long, but she did do a good job of closing all the ends, and so the reader is satisfied with the story. So I definitely recommend that you read it if you are a Karin Slaughter fan. And for Never Tell by Lisa Gardner, it was a Dee Warren book series, also okay to read as a standalone. This one was interesting because it goes back to Dee's first case, where she discovered a woman who was accused of murdering her father. She literally had the gun in her hand when the police came, but it was actually written off as an accident. And now, like 16 years later, the woman is accused of murdering her husband. Same scenario. She has the gun in hand. So how many times can a woman be accused of murder? And now Dee Warren is more seasoned, and she's really looking into what is this woman's motives and what didn't she catch the first time around? Or is it all a facade and there are more secrets to these men than meets the eye? So this was a solid 4 for me. I liked that it had good police procedural work, but it was also a little dark. So trigger warning, there is dark, kidnapping, serial rapists references in the book. So just look out for that, but this was a solid 4 for me. The next 2 books I read were actually about authors I just discovered last year, which was T.M. Logan and Michael Robotham. And both of them wrote like psychological thrillers, which really I was so impressed with. And I immediately put myself on like a watch list for their next novel. And so for Michael Robotham, it was Good Girl, Bad Girl. And it was the first in a series that he is actually writing about a psychologist named Cyrus. And this one had a lot of moving parts. There was a murder that occurred. There was a murder that, or like a case that hasn't been solved, and there was a lot of characters involved. So because of all the moving parts, I wasn't really invested in one story, and it got a little bit busy at times. I will pick up a second series because I think he was vague on purpose in this book because he wanted to sell maybe the second book, but I am invested in his writing enough to want to read him again. So Good Girl, Bad Girl was about a 3, round up to 3.5 for me. But if you are going to read Michael Robotham, I would recommend Watching You to see his brilliant work in that story. And then there is 29 Seconds by T.M. Logan. And this is such an interesting scenario. So imagine there's someone in your life that you didn't like, or someone who really irritates you. And because you did a favor for someone, this mysterious person says to you, name a name and I will get rid of them for you. So the protagonist in our story, she is a professor at a university and she is doing such great work, but it's not being recognized because her boss is kind of like sleazy, he's shady, and he only wants one thing from her so that she can move up. And that's really degrading for her, and he makes her life miserable. So when this proposition comes up, she's really tempted to take it. Now, this book I found so disappointing because T.M. Logan's last book was so great. And I just kept comparing it, and I think that's not fair. But even like, I think 40, 50, 60% into the book, nothing much had happened. And I was just waiting for something to happen. And most of the things happened in the last like 10% of the book. And I felt like it could have happened sooner. It was just a disconnect for me. So even though the concept was great, I don't think the execution was well. So that is the first part of my September book wrap up. Look up for my second video of all the books I read in September. I hope you enjoyed hearing them. Which book was your favorite out of the September? And if really you can just read one, please read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day, and I wish you happy reading. As always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!